Welcome back to Econline, everyone. This lesson and the next couple of lessons are going to be about something called surplus, and specifically we're going to be looking at consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total surplus. These are going to be a little bit different from the previous forms of surplus we've talked about. Let's just take a jump back real quick and review those. So in previous parts of the course, we have looked at surplus as a situation where the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded, right? So this is our quantity supplied. This is our quantity demanded. And since the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded, we have something called a surplus. We call that a market surplus. Again, quantity supplied greater than quantity demanded. But that's not the kind of surplus we're going to be talking about in the next couple of videos. When we talk about producer and consumer surplus, and then later on total surplus, we're looking at something a little different than that. So let's get into some of the specifics here about consumer surplus and really what that concept is. We're also going to look at how to measure it, and from there we will compare it with producer surplus and total surplus. Okay, so in front of you, you can see a table that has 4 different buyers' willingness to pay. A little Beatles reference here, too. I should also add that these slides come from Greg Mankiw's Principles of Economics, 2007 edition. So that's where the slides come from, like the teacher resources and so on. So I want to give credit there. But taking a look at the table in front of us, we have 4 buyers, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And we have their willingness to pay for a record album. So we're just going to refer to it as an album from here on out. So John is willing to pay the most at 100, and as you work your way down the chart, you can see what each other person is willing to pay. All right, so simple enough. We've seen a demand schedule before in this class. All right, so let's look at the graph of this. Now, this graph looks different than most demand graphs that we've seen before because it's really, really specific, right? So at over $100, how many people are willing to pay? So I'm going to use green just so you can see where I'm at. At $100, when the price is over 100, what is the quantity? Well, as we trace our way down, obviously that's 0. Okay, so if the price of the CD were exactly $100, we see that John is willing to pay that much, so John would buy 1. And you can see how this would follow. If the price were only $80, then that would bring Paul into the market. If the price were only $70, George would enter the market. And finally, at a price of $50, Ringo enters the market. So we see right here that these guys have different to pay, and they enter into the market at different price points. But keep in mind that once the market arrives on an equilibrium price, everybody in the market is going to pay that price. So let's take a look at some basics here. Suppose the price of the record is $80. When John walks into the store, he may be willing to pay $100. You've probably had this experience too. You go into a store, you expect to pay one price. You get there, and the price is less. The actual price of $80 is less than your willingness to pay, in this case of $100. So we would say if you're John, you got a little bit of surplus there. You got a little bit more than what you paid for as far as you're concerned, because you were willing to pay 100, you only had to pay 80. So it's kind of like saying that you got an $100 item in your mind for only $80. So that extra 20 is kind of like some, it's a little added value that you get to put in your pocket. If you look at the right side of this panel, you can see now as the price falls, that consumer surplus increases because now it's $70. First of all, John is going to get a little bit more surplus. His surplus gets larger than it was over here, so you would add that section on. And then we also have who comes in and gets his surplus of $10 as well. So now the total consumer surplus at this point would be the 30 that John has, his original 20, plus the new 10, and then the $10 in surplus for Paul. You guys probably can see where this is going at this point. We can basically see across the board, now if we just flatten this out, this is a theoretical graph. Now, taking a look at this, and by the way, I know in the note sheet that you should be using for this, there is a theoretical graph and a specific graph. The specific graphs, obviously, are the ones from the previous slides. This would be our theoretical graph. So just some basic idea here. What do we see as the definition of consumer surplus? Well, here it is, right? On the graph, we see it's the difference between the demand curve and price, right? So we're going to characterize the demand to the buyers. This is the value that they place on the item, their willingness to pay. and we would subtract from that at each quantity the actual price. Value to the buyers minus the price is the definition of consumer surplus. We can see it on this graph, again, as the shaded area between the price and the demand curve. This is, on the right-hand side, an extended example of what we just looked at. As the price fell from P1 to P2, there was additional surplus for the buyers who were already in the market, and then new surplus created for the buyers who were now, we'll say, priced in. When the price fell, they were ready to get involved with the market at that point.